I'm going to get going. I hope you're all ready. No pressure. Hello. My name is Carrie Jean Mixa. I am the current chair of the Indiana Coalition for Public Education, Monroe County. ICPE is you. We are you. We are community members that care and advocate for public education because public education serves all children. ICPE is a nonpartisan. ICPE is grassroots. ICPE Monroe County's operating budget is less than $5,000 each year. We are indeed David versus a lot of Goliaths. I want to point out something very important now that our legislative session has wrapped up and our legislators have, well, put educators through the ringer yet again. A lot of bad bills failed, which was good, but it required a lot of work, and at the end, we're like, what just happened? Why? Was this a good use of time by all? A lot of good bills didn't even get heard. For example, elimination of textbook fees. Right now, public education in Indiana isn't fully free because parents pay for textbooks. Tax credits for public school foundations, something the Foundation for MCCSC pushes for every year. Private school foundations receive tax credits. Why shouldn't public school foundations? And there was a teacher prep bill that guaranteed one period each day reserved for class prep. What a concept. Sad we have to have a bill to mandate that, but there were also a few other good bills. The point to all of that is that elections matter. Indiana has a budget year coming up in 2023 and an election this fall. To quote Ball State economist Michael Hicks from yesterday's paper, the Star Press, if we spent the same share of GDP on education, which includes higher ed, that we did in 2010 in Indiana, our budget would be $1.8 billion higher per year. Currently, budget for the higher ed and K-12 is about $10 billion. And the state just passed a tax cut that will trim a further $500 million per year from schools and colleges. It is worth noting that spending on TANF and Medicaid rose by 50% over the same time. We are good at spending money to treat symptoms of poverty, but doing poorly at spending to treat the cause of poverty. Clearly, Indiana is reactionary and not proactive in certain areas. Our legislators could do better. Maybe we need better educated legislators at the State House. Be sure you are registered to vote. Be an educated voter. Research your candidates and be sure they support funding old school public education. Vote for public education. On to this event. This is the second of a series of events titled The Power of Public Education. Things have gotten pretty heated as of late. We've gone from celebrating teachers last year to villainizing them this year throughout the country. We as a society have lost focus. COVID has been hard. Education reform has confused us. And social media is a blessing and a curse. We hope that this series brings things back into focus and educates. You can see in your program the next event. You can also find our event listings on our website, keepeducationpublic.org. I now turn this event over to one of our moderators and board member, Wendy Morensic. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome everybody here. I think I'm going to turn this a little bit and go to the side. I have some little notes. This is the second, Carrie was saying, of a series on community conversations. And this is something that we did years ago when ICPE was coming off the ground and the world was in a different place. And now we're trying to work our way back to pulling the community in and to be part of our conversations. And this one is particularly important because what we're talking about is communication. This is why we started these in the first place. We feel there's a great need right now to work our way back to civil conversations and to get our parents back in the schools. It's been hard getting started. And just the audience at this point, you can see we'd love to have more people here. We welcome those of you that are here streaming and that are online. And we hope tonight will be beneficial to you in thinking about this big, what is it, not elusive, but word of communication. It is one of those things that includes so much and that we will not be able to address it all. But the great news is we have this wonderful panel of educators and parents who have taken the time out of their really long days. They are currently on the front line, and they have a lot to share with us about communication and strategies that they use in their schools and with parents and with community. Also, we want you to write down any information, questions that you may have, and also write down something if you think it was helpful to you. Not just a question, but something you can share back to us that you found helpful in this conversation, in this discussion. I think that's important so that we can hold on to things. Peg has some note cards she's going to pass out. And again, write down comments or write down questions if you would please. I also want to begin this and structure the conversation a little bit, partly because this topic was one when we were talking about topics to bring up in our board meeting. I said, well, we should talk about communication. And of course, when you volunteer information, you get to be the one to moderate. But anyway, that is fine, and we will go forth. And again, I have this lovely panel. I do want to introduce the panel before I make my comments so that you know who is here. On the far right, we have Dr. Markay Winston from MCCSC, who has been on the front line for some time now and has a lot to offer and share with us over the last numerous years with MC. How long have you been with MCCSC?
5 years. This is my fifth year.
Okay, and she's been previous places that she's going to share and talk about throughout that. And then next we have Maggie Polk-Olivo, and she is a teacher with MCCSC, and she is in the area of the fine arts. She works in music, and she has worked both in university and currently now at Fairview Elementary
Yes,
School.
and Marlin too.
And Marlin as well.
A long time ago, yes.
Okay, great. So then we move on to somebody I have known for some time, and she is a principal at Edgewood Elementary School. For one moment, Brenda, your name went out of my head. I'm very sorry for that. Brenda Whitaker, and I've known Brenda as a professor at IU. She has worked with our student teachers and has done a marvelous job at Edgewood Primary School. She has been a great supporter of educators all the way through. And she also came to IU and helped us and represented the community when IU was pulling schools in to talk about the issues that are out there. Sometimes in higher ed, we lose perspective of what's really happening out in the field. And Brenda was one to come in and help us and talk quite a bit about those types of things. And then on the far left here, we have Melanie Cohen, who is a PTO president, a former PTO president, used to be at Marlin. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about parent organizations and the types of things that they do with the schools here at MCCSC. Okay? I want to look at some of my notes for a minute here to structure some of the things I wanted to talk about. Can you hear me well enough? I've got a teacher voice, so that probably works just well without that whole thing there. I think it's important for us to think about some of the ideas behind communication. And we know very well, the research is very clear, that schools that have parent participation and community involvement benefit children. And we know that over and over again, that the children progress better and our communities thrive more. And there's plenty of research to talk about that very issue. And so we're hoping that we can get back into that mode of having our schools and communities be more involved and connected. We've lost our way a little bit through the pandemic, and I think everybody can see that. I still supervise in schools right now, and it's been a while since I've been in the schools, but when I did go back, I was just really struck by the emptiness in the hallways. And where I would used to see parents and families and children walking around in the schools, it was just so different. And I know you probably will address some of those issues tonight on things that you've noticed too with the loss of our parents in our buildings and all the activities, the carnivals, parent meetings. And I know some of those are still going on, but it has taken a while to kind of get us back really to where we want to be with our parents and our community being back in our schools. We want to thrive again, so we want them there. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was what's been going on politically a little bit, and what's been happening with the loss of our schools. The modeling aspect of communication is one of the most important things as far as learning with children. And when children have models, they learn, they listen. They're always listening to us. They may not obey, as they say. There's a song that says that, but they certainly do listen. And we know that it's very important that what we're saying, what's coming out of our mouth expressively, what we're hearing reflectively is very powerful. And media has had an impact on us, and we know that. Carrie talked about that. It's a curse and a blessing, as what you said. So this is something we kind of have lost our way, and we hope that, again, we can have these conversations about civil communication and listening and reflecting. Sometimes when we hear people, they're frustrated. There's always something behind behavior. And when I was teaching courses at IU, I worked with special education teachers, and the courses I taught were focused on behavior. And one of the things I would always share with the teachers was, when you see behavior, stop. Don't look at the behavior. Look past the behavior, because what we know when we see really aggressive and angry behaviors, we know that there's something behind that. We know there's a function to that behavior, whether it be attention, a need for power. We also know that there's emotion of some type behind that. Anger, anguish, fear, worries. So it's, again, quite important for us to be mindful of the fact that what we're seeing with people when we hear things, we shouldn't be passing judgment. We need to try to understand a little bit deeper. And I know that probably our panelists will talk a little bit more about that. But that was certainly one message that I wanted to get across about the power of what we're seeing and what's really happening behind that. So I will go ahead and we'll get started with our panel here. And I'm going to start with you, Michelle, and I know you had a little bit of a PowerPoint. Again, write down things you found beneficial from what they're telling you in their stories. I appreciate you being here. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. That's safer. Sorry. It'll take just a second to get set up. Let me do this. So, can y'all hear me? Okay. So I'm Michelle Cohen, and part of the intro that wasn't said was that I've been in the Bloomington area since 1994. So I've been here for quite some time, and I do have two children in MCCSC. One's in Marlin, and one is at North High School. And what I'll be talking about is kind of just my personal experience starting out at Marlin and working as a PTO member, but also just as a standalone parent, and try to help folks understand kind of how they can best communicate with teachers and staff. So let me advance. Next slide. There we go. Okay, so one thing I would like to talk about is, I guess I've split this up into two different sections. One is communication with the school, and then the other would be communicating with the school corporation and the board. So first, with the school, the very important first step is to build personal connections. And I feel that if you set the tone early on and you get to know people, then when there is an issue or a frustration or whatnot, you can really work together to solve problems if you already have a foundation together. And the way that I did that, especially at elementary, was I purposefully joined the PTO and became very active in it. And it was at a time when we were in the school building. So and Marlin's a small school, I met all the teachers, they all knew who I was. And it really helped if there was an issue or a challenge or anything like that. You have that personal connection that you can move from. So I would say that's the main thing. If you don't have time to get that involved, that's okay. You know, at the beginning of the school year, make a phone call, talk to your child's teachers, but make that personal connection, and it can be 5 minutes, you know, but if you have a foundation of mutual understanding, that really helps. In addition to just getting involved, the other thing that I found very helpful was to write a letter at the beginning of the school year. Teachers usually write letters to parents. Parents, it really helps if you write a letter to your child's teacher and you frame what your outlook is. And you can just talk about, okay, this is our family. We have, you know, 3 kids, a dog. We live in this neighborhood, basic things. But also be very specific about what your goal is. And just flat out say, I'm looking to be a partner with you in my child's education. And I think that goes an awfully long way. And I've listed out here some things that I think are very good to put in that letter and also to do throughout the year. One thing is to make sure that teachers know how to communicate with you. If you work second shift and you can't get calls after school time, say that. Some of these things teachers will ask, and you'll have a survey, but it's important just to be very, very clear about it. I'm going to grab my water before my voice totally goes out. I got allergy season has started in Indiana, and there goes voice. So if you've got a child who has, I think I've gone forward. I'm going to stick with this. One thing I would say is just be really brief and solutions-oriented in your approach. Teachers really, really care, but they have X many students, and so you don't want to belabor a point. You want to make sure that you maybe do professional but quick communications. And then also, sometimes you want to send just a purely positive message. Every once in a while, if your child comes home and has a great lesson or says, hey, I learned this, or whatever, just send a nice thank you or my child enjoyed this particular thing, because I think that is also a way to just let them know that you're paying attention and that you're engaged. This is the slide I was looking for. Okay, so in that letter to teachers that I mentioned, don't forget, if you think that it would be beneficial for the school social worker or the health aide to know something in that letter, to make sure you send it to them. If you feel like you need to keep it confidential, make sure you put that on the letter. If your child would be mortified to know that you did this, make sure you tell the teacher that too. But I think just basically giving a family background, if you've got a situation where you've got maybe shared custody or something like that, a lot of times that shows up in the forms you fill out, but I feel like it's a lot easier to digest in this kind of format. And the second thing is, if your child has special needs or an illness, chronic illness or something like that, again, that will probably show up if they have an IEP or if they have, some forms you have to fill out at the health office. But again, it's important to specify kind of what those are and how that might manifest in the classroom. Third and fourth, I would include your students' strengths, both academic, emotional, social. Just, who's this kid? Maybe include a photo and really kind of let their personality come out, especially if your child is new to the school or if the teacher is new to the school. I think that helps, or if the school is really big and they don't know the student. 4 is the students' areas of struggle. Again, the same things, academically, emotionally, socially. Maybe they've had a friend move away recently. Anything like that would be important to include there. And then number 5 is some strategies for trouble spots. And what has worked at home when this child has had an issue? What have you tried and hasn't worked yet, but you're still hopeful about? Those sorts of things I think are helpful. And then also be open to say, hey, I don't know everything, and if you find something that works, please let me know, because I want to help my student at home as well. So The next thing would be with the school corporation and the school board, you wouldn't be doing kind of a proactive approach like that. I think the communications would be as needed, but you should use the same type of tone and brevity and a solutions-based approach as you would with the teachers. If there is an issue, I think you need to be very precise about it. And again, the school corporation staff is super busy, and you want to make sure that you hone in on what your particular issue is. And recognize that the people who are doing this work, they're not doing it to be rich and famous. They're doing it because they care. So if you're running into maybe a roadblock or something that's not quite satisfactory to you, try to find out what's the stumbling block. Do you actually have the power to make a change or not? Are there budgetary constraints? Are there, legal constraints? Because as a parent, you don't know all those things. So just ask, find out. And then also, this may possibly should have gone to the beginning, but follow the chain of command. So, if you have an issue and you think it's best, or you don't know where to start with the teacher. If that doesn't quite work and they say, I can't really handle that, or that's something above where I'm at to make a decision, principal, and you keep going up. Some things you can recognize that are system-wide already, and you can just get that. But just be mindful that there is kind of a hierarchy, and you don't want to go above somebody if you don't need to. And avoid using social media as the first step. So, and I call it anti-social media. I do find that it's useful if you're having an issue and you have maybe a closed group that you trust, that you can say, hey, is anybody, kind of having this, not calling anybody out, but just say, this seems kind of off or whatever, and just see if your problem is widespread or if it's just your particular case. So that will help you know who to address it to. And social media, I think, has its place, but not until way down the line. So I probably took up more time than I needed to. I think, are we doing questions after as a whole
It's
panel?
at the end, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Appreciate that. I did want to make a comment regarding parent resource centers in schools. I know there was a really big push and a lot of legislation federally in the 90s to get resource centers set up in the schools for parents. And I don't hear a lot about that, but they're probably there, and maybe, you can, is there a place that you could refer them to?
Within each school? I am completely unfamiliar with that term, honestly.
Okay. Do any of you remember the parent resource centers? The legislation was very strong in the 90s to set up resource centers in the states and then within the schools where parents could go and pick up resources and things like this. But I didn't know if they still have those or they're still around. It's something we certainly could consider to maybe make parents who are a little more reticent to want to come in and find out information about the schools or where you could keep information. I know the main office has a lot of that information, probably. You could talk about that, Brenda. But just something to keep in mind in ways that parents will feel more welcome, a place that they could go and sit and talk with each other or something to that effect. But anyway, with that said, Brenda, could you talk a little bit about what's going on in your school and some of your experiences with communication?
I can, and I'll just pick up right there on the Parent Resource Center because we did have a whole room dedicated to that and a director. We still, fortunately, have a part-time director, thanks to the grant from the Monroe County Community Foundation, and she does a great job of bringing parents in. Over the course of time, you have to balance out the needs in your school for space, and when you're a growing school, then that space becomes very precious. And so that's what happened to us. So we don't have the resource center. We do have a director, and she works very hard to bring parents in and is very happy to start working on those activities again. And we have started that and picked that back up. But of course, for the last couple of years, that kind of was on the sideline. And I can just completely affirm everything that was just heard. And Very well said. And I think one of the messages she's giving, and I want to just piggyback on, is that positive approach to communication versus a deficit approach. You want to build that in your schools, and we want to as administrators. So we try to make sure that we are setting the stage to start those positive conversations by getting the parents in. But even though we haven't been able to do that much the past couple of years, one thing that has never gone out of style is that positive phone call home from the school to the home. I will never forget stopping in my tracks. You know, back in the 90s, we've been talking about the 90s, we walked in the house one evening, and remember, you'd always check your answering machine way back then? And we punched it, and we're going about our business, and we all literally stopped in our tracks because it was a teacher from my son's school, which was Jackson Creek. And I'm looking at David. I'm already giving him the eye. What's this all about? Why didn't you tell us? And this teacher went on for about 3 minutes about how much he enjoyed having our son at the school. And we all just stopped and just in delight listened to this message. It just made a wonderful evening, and I've never forgotten that phone call. And it's one of the things I emphasize to the teachers, and the principals need to do it too. We need to call home when we're seeing those great things happen in the cafeteria, in the hallway, in the library, wherever those students are, to start building that collateral with the families, to let them know, yes, we do see your child when they're doing something right. We do see that kid that maybe he's not that star student, maybe he's not the star athlete, just a great kid that we're so happy to have in our school. And when I take the time to do it, the response from the parents is just precious. It usually gets real quiet for a few seconds before they respond, but it does help to bridge that gap. Also, always try to take a friendly approach, and I learned this the hard way during one of my first years as an assistant principal. I knew this kid had done what the discipline referral said on the bus. I was sure of it, and brought him in and gave him the consequences. And the mom tried to call me, and I was a little abrupt. Well, later on that day, I found out that I was wrong. And I just, you know, when that hits you, you feel horrible. You feel so guilty. I thought, I've got to pick up that phone, and I've got to call that mom back, and I've got to tell her. It's one of the best conversations I've ever had. Even, you know, that was about 18 years ago. I said, I am so sorry. And I felt horrible. She immediately forgave me. Now, I had to deal with that student several more times, but I had an opening. She knew I was going to admit when I was wrong and he was right. And it gave us a relationship so that we could start working in a positive way on that behavior. So I always tell teachers and principals, apologies are always in order when we're wrong. Be upfront, admit it, so that you can go on from there. We have to make those opportunities in our school that will build that trust between the home and the school. And part of that is having those events that can bring those families into the school. And you've all seen them advertised, you know, different times, those donuts for dads, the muffins for moms, the breakfast buddies, music programs, art fairs, science fairs, STEM nights, and we are slowly bringing those back. But when you give those families opportunities to come into the school, to see you in action, to see their kids in action, it opens up that conversation so that when you're sitting there having that hard conversation and the parents are saying, but you know, they never do this at home. They're probably right. They are seeing a different kid than what we're maybe seeing at school. But it does give them a glimpse into the day so that they have a context within which to think with you on those during those times. I know we usually don't have at the elementary level a hard time getting the moms in. Those moms come in, they want to volunteer, and you're right. That's the way that they can get to know the school and the school can get to know them. But we have struggled to get the dads to come in. So we've had a few events that have just focused on dads, and I always get the biggest kick out of it. They're some of my favorite events. We might have a breakfast, and the kids can bring a dad or a buddy or an uncle or a grandparent in, and we'll have maybe some speaker that will just talk for 5 or 10 minutes on the importance of reading with your child. And those dads come in and they hardly give you eye contact. They're dragging, they did not, you can tell by every inch of their being, they do not want to be there. They did not want to come that morning, but someone told them, you're going. It is so much fun to watch them sit and relax and start warming up. And then as they're leaving, they're laughing and talking with each other. They're talking with their child. It's just one of those great things to watch, but we have to make that happen, and that's one of the things our family involvement director does. We have to make those events happen and just pull on the guilt strings as much as we can to get those dads in, and they're always glad. They always leave much happier than when they arrived. Maybe a cup of coffee doesn't hurt either. We have to keep in mind that communication is a two-way street. And we have to set up the activities, the protocols to make it a two-way street. Your idea of that letter is excellent, because the teachers are always writing letters to the parents, aren't they? But it's great for the parents to write a letter back. And the letters are good. Parent-teacher conferences are good, and we do our best to make them a friendly setup where maybe the child is kind of leading that conference and we're setting goals rather than making it something, let me tell you what, your child needs to improve on or is not doing well. But one of the tools that we have found over the last couple of years that we can use when we can't get parents in, and it's not the best way, but it works. Those Zoom meetings really do work because you're able to put a face, everybody can see each other, everybody can hear each other. So if you can't do face-to-face, we've made good use of that Zooming, and that's one positive thing that's come out of that. We've all learned how to do that. There are so many good ways to communicate. And I've tried all kinds of things over the years, newsletters that are just plastered with everybody's kid's picture in it so that the parent will want to at least look at it and find their kid's picture. But after doing things years and years, for me anyway, the thing that works best is a friendly letter that's quick and to the point at the end of a week. And it's a letter that usually includes a brief overview of here's what went on in school today. Like a couple weeks ago, we had our big parade of the week. So I just briefly touched on that with the parents, letting them know. And then maybe a few bullet points. Here's what's coming up. Here's something to think about. And then I try to close with something encouraging. Maybe it's a comment that I heard a teacher give, or better yet, one of their kids give when I was in on lunch duty. But that letter is sent out in a way that allows that family to respond to. And frequently, much more frequently than when I did the newsletters with pictures, I get an email back with a letter from the parent. And I love that. It opens up that conversation and lets them know, yep, this is the way you can get in touch with me, and I'm going to respond to that and reach out to you. You touched on social media. It can be a blessing and a curse. And when it's used correctly, it can help. If your schools do have those Twitter accounts, those Instagram accounts, that does give you a window into a classroom. And I look at several MCC classrooms just because I want to see what's that teacher doing? What's that music teacher over there doing? What's the art teacher doing? What are they doing in their literacy groups? It gives you a brief idea of something that went on. And teachers are so good, too, about having those photo hosting sites for parents that they'll send a link out to, full of pictures of here's what happened this week. So those are good ways to use the social media. We all have those situations, those meetings with parents and administrators that are difficult. I had them as a parent. I was one of those parents that I actually got called, and I actually heard these words come out of my mouth. Are you sure you have the right number? You're talking about my kid? And as soon as I said it, I thought, oh my goodness, you of all people know better. Yes, it was your kid that did that. But we've had those difficult conversations, and we feel like we're at an impasse. And I'm sitting there thinking, we've got to get through this with this family, and we've got to help this kid. The best go-to, whether you're a parent or an administrator, is keep asking questions. Eventually, you will find a path through, but you've got to make sure that you have built that shared understanding. And so many times, I'm sitting there thinking, we've got to move this conversation forward. And I'll just ask a question. Maybe it's one I think I already know the answer to, and I'm always amazed at how much more it opens up our understanding so that we can at least take the next step. So ask questions. I tell parents, just keep asking. We throw out phrases and words all the time that we think are perfectly sensible and are easy to understand, and they're not. It's like me going into my doctor's office and her using that medical jargon on me. I need her to talk in simple layman terms. Make us do that. Ask the questions. That solutions-based approach, we love that. We love that. And that should be our message. We should be the ones with the solutions, but we love it when the parents come too. When you are very concerned, we know this is your most precious possession. There is nothing that means more to you than this child. And it's hard to keep those emotions down. If you can try to keep in mind, if you maybe don't blame, don't defend, but try to come with a solution-based approach, that helps all of us. You know, our values will always differ. But no matter what, we have to listen with respect. We have to explain whatever side we're on with respect, and understand that at the end, both of us are going to have to compromise. We don't have to compromise our values, but we may have to compromise our expectations a little bit. Just a few little things to keep in mind that teachers are teaching during the day. We'll get frequent calls from parents changing dismissal plans. And they'll try to email the teacher. Well, the teacher's teaching, even during their prep. You know, when I was a teacher and it was my prep, boy, I was getting ready for that next subject. We want to, have our materials ready. We want to plan these great lessons for the kids. That takes time. So just keep in mind that if you have a message that you need to get to the teacher, for us anyway at RBB, it's best to go through the office, and then if it's an emergency, we can get you the help you need. They need their lunch breaks to eat, nourish themselves, and regulate themselves. They need that prep time to prepare for their students. So when you're wanting that communication quickly, keep that in mind. Go to the office, and we will help you from there.
Really lovely ideas from both of you on both sides of the picture. Was really wonderful. And your point about finding common ground, I think, is so important. We aren't going to always agree with what's happening, but we have to find a place where we can say, okay, can you live with this, and kind of go back and forth, and continuing to ask questions helps you learn more. I think I really love that approach, and I appreciate you sharing that. And your idea is a solution-based, yes. Very, very important for this kids, and that's our common ground, are our children. And we have to keep reminding ourselves that we're all here. We all want to do what's best for our kids, and sometimes it's hard to get to that point, but we keep working at it. So thank you both for sharing that. Okay, Maggie.
Yeah, this has been really lovely to hear all the insights.
So, you know, I was really honored to be asked to join this panel, and it was so funny because even today I was thinking of all the times in my life to be an expert on communication. I don't know that this is the time. And the reason I say that is because I feel universally our buffers are down. I feel that we are all having a hard time, and we are all struggling to even take care of our own basic needs. And so it makes it really hard for us to empathize and really to remind ourselves to listen. And some of my dearest colleagues, we've really worked through some things. And I wanted to bring up a metaphor because I work with this wonderful group of kids. At Fairview, we do have an unusual arts program. So we do have, you know, general music and art and PE, but we also have like some arts choices. And I get to teach the marimba ensemble, and I meet with these kids, and you know, here they are, and they're all fifth graders, and they really want to show off like how fast they can play and how loud they can play, and I'm giving them the count off, and then it's like crash and burn, but they know all the notes, right? And they're even breaking off and teaching each other parts. They really love this. And then I kind of said, you know, it's kind of like a basketball team, and we need to aim towards the same goal, the same hoop. And right now, you're getting baskets, but they're in the other team's hoops. So you know, and we really worked on that. So I guess what I realized with them is I feel that's happening everywhere. I feel I have something to say. I'm going to say it louder and faster so people can hear me, and everyone's talking on top of each other. So it's been really, really fun to really work with that. And I did have the realization, I'm like, oh, what am I going to do about this crew, you know? And I thought it's been two years, you know, in this pandemic, and 2 years where there has not been that same collective music making. But I think even in a broader sense, that communication, where we have had social media as some of our primary forms of communication, and we know that's for better or for worse, right? We know that ultimately this discourse, these conversations, that's where we can really work things out. We can read we can read those facial expressions. And again, you know, for so long we were masked, and some of us are still wearing a mask. So I think, just to kind of reiterate much of what was being said, I think really trying to just sit and listen and hear the other person. I think, again, being proactive with ideas, being solution focused, knowing, again, that no teacher does it for the fame. So I'm very proud to be a teacher, but at the same time, you know, I do it because I care, and I want to be there. But I do have times where a family member might call and be distressed, and so we have to figure out how to best work that. So one thing I would say in terms of kind of the chain of command is, yes, please go to the source. So if your child comes home, and I'm a parent too, so I know when my daughter comes and she might be pretty upset about something that's happened, or my son, same thing, but listen to what happened and then go to the classroom teacher, or and then if that doesn't work, then go to the principal, and then if that doesn't work, then, you know, have conversations. I think that's one of the most proactive things you can do. Also, getting involved. PTO is a great way, pandemic or not, they are still going, and they are still going strong, and they always need membership. Programs, I was just so happy when you brought that up, but it's true. These music programs, carnivals, I know we have an awesome carnival that's so sweet, and they tie it with literacy, and it's always so sweet to see the families, you know, doing like math games with their kids for prizes, and it's lovely. So any of those outside events, go to it. And it's also great to see your teachers and see your administrators in a social, on that level. I think it makes it really meaningful and very special. And then I would say one thing that I've thought of, I think as a music teacher, and then I work with our community artists to kind of organize that program. And one thing that's been really tricky, I think most people know of Fairview, where I am. It is a Title I school, and I think our percentage is 85% now free and reduced lunch. So one thing that has been tricky is communication, and I have learned quite a few things. I know email does not work for over half of our students. So yes, we use email, and yes, we use Blackboard, but almost all of our teachers have some sort of texting method that we use. I also know that social media, this is important for us to advertise the things that we do on social media. I know that also connects a lot of our families. I know things as simple as family pickup, just to wave and just to smile at the teachers. I know that's always really special to make those personal connections. And I think that, again, back to the modeling and working with these students and working with each other. I mean, again, it has been a really hard year. I mean, I could say, raise your hand if you cried in the last week or the last, it's I think that it's just been very difficult. So if we're having a hard time getting through the day, we may not be our A game. And I think more than ever, that's why we need to be there for each other. So I think that's pretty much what I have, but I was just thrilled with all of the ideas that came here too.
You made some really good points, yes, thank you. I think your point about, is this the time to be talking about communication? I was thinking that as I was writing some of my own notes down, and I thought, well, maybe we shouldn't, but now we're moving out. This is the time. I think people are starting to feel the changes happening. Here we all are without masks for the first time in a long time. So I do think this is a time to kind of move in there. As I said, I wish we could get more people involved, and we have to keep working on it because I think it is going to be hard for us to make these transitions. But I also love what you said about reflective listening and trying to hear what somebody is saying. And I think that's where we've lost our place a bit. We're so eager to say what's, kind of building inside of ourselves that we're not taking that moment. We're ready to what we want to say, but we're not hearing the other person. And I think it takes practice and time to be able to build those skills, truly practicing. I mean, I try to do it with my own children who half the time they're like, Mom, you're not listening to me. And that's probably true half of the time. But I do try to listen to them. Or they'll tell me something in particular and say, hey, I'm going out to this party. And my first responses are things like, well, be careful. Are you driving? Who's going with? Instead of, go have a good time. I'm not really hearing, what she's saying to me. And I have 3 daughters, so I've been through a number of these interesting issues, and they're very passionate. So I had to learn to be a very good listener, which I've enjoyed doing. But yes, we all could get better at reflective listening. Okay, Marquet, you're next.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
The beauty of being the last person to speak is that you can say ditto, ditto, ditto. They took all of my key talking points. And as a result, I have nothing else to share. I'm teasing. But no, in all sincerity, though, they really did take great points. And I love how Ms. Cohen kind of kicked us off in highlighting some key points just in terms of being proactive, being positive, setting the tone. I think that's essential. I think that's essential from an educator standpoint, and it's equally as essential from a parental standpoint. And so oftentimes, I often find myself really trying to do exactly what Wendy was saying in terms of being an aggressive listener And what I mean by that is listening with intentionality, listening for what is said and listening for what is not said. And I think the challenge that many of us educators have had these last couple of years is we haven't been able to communicate in a way that we are accustomed to. And so we've had to really reprioritize, how are we communicating with our families? How are we communicating with one another? I will talk sometimes about the 5 C's. So when I think about communication, I think about 5 C's, 3 C's, 5 C's, whatever. And so I think about clarity, the importance of being clear, the importance of making sure that you know what you want to talk about, what you want to convey, and being really crystal clear about it. I think that Ms. Cohen mentioned something around clarity, being real specific, being clear about that. And I think as educators, we work really hard to try to do that, and sometimes we think we've been clear, and we think we've communicated effectively, and in actuality, oftentimes we haven't. And so I think that being crystal clear with what we're trying to convey and asking questions to see whether or not we've been understood. So I think that's one of the first C's that I think about. I think about the C of collaboration. You know, going into it with a collaborative spirit, going into the conversation with, we're kind of in this together. You know, no one party has all of the right answers. Parents, you know your children better than we do. We know educationally what's happening in our classrooms and in our buildings, but really having a collaborative spirit and thinking about how are we going to join as partners to really focus in on what needs to happen to kind of support our students. I think that having a caring spirit is really important. When we're communicating, if our families feel as if we are caring, they recognize that there's a great deal of sincerity in our approach in thinking about how are we going to help to accelerate learning for Johnny? You know, how are we going to support Susie in dealing with some of the anxiety issues? If we can show that sincerity in our caring and having a caring spirit, I think that goes a long way in meeting each other in the middle. I think that establishing a connection, it's about relationship building. One of the things I talk a lot about with the members of my team and with administrators and such is it's one thing to know all the right academic answers, but it's another thing to have that relationship. And so you cannot over-prioritize relationship building. Building relationships with your teachers, building relationships with your students, building relationships with your parents and your families. At the end of the day, when you really don't know the answer and you don't really know what's going to happen next, i.e. the last 2 years during this pandemic, sometimes what you have to lean on is that relationship and the trust that's been built up over time. And I don't take that for granted. I spend a lot of time really focusing on getting to know individuals, getting to know what's important to them, and really working on relationships. And I can assure you that there have been educators who probably poo-pooed that idea when I would make that suggestion to them. They probably wish later on that they had spent a little bit more time focusing on the relationship. And I think all of my colleagues might agree that that's an important component. And candor. I think that we owe it to one another, to our teachers, to our parents, to all of our communities to be candid and to be crystal clear and not to beat around the bush, to demonstrate candor. So when I think about communication and the ways in which I try to live that, I work really hard on the relationship pieces. I try to make sure that I'm clear. And I think one of the things that I think I do exceedingly well is listening. I absolutely try to listen to hear. I mean, I was in conversations with 3 or 4 parents today who were just struggling with how best to support their children. And I didn't come up with the best answers. I didn't have all the solutions, but I can assure you that the parents that I spoke with walked away with a sense of understanding that I listened deeply, and I demonstrated caring, and I tried to be very crystal clear with them, even though it may not have been the answer they wanted to hear, but we did so in a collaborative space and a collaborative approach. And so I think those those things matter. And the more that we can do that, the better. I think our communication over the last 2 years, it was rocky those first few weeks. I'm not going to lie. I think those of you who are on the receiving end, because many times our parents were looking to us for answers, and on March 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th of 2020, we didn't know the answers. Some of us didn't really think this was going to be more than a week or two. I remember we were about to go into spring break, and we were trying to figure out, well, when we come back, what are we going to do? How are we going to communicate? And so I think during this time period, we've had a heightened attention to the importance of communication, probably unlike any other time in the field of education. And I think there are times where we absolutely got it right, and there are times where it's been a little bumpy. And sometimes we've been receiving grace, and then many other times we may not have always received grace. And I think that's unfortunate because everyone is in it for the right reasons. And so as I reflect over the last couple of years and how we've communicated, how we've collaborated, how we've had a particular vision in mind in terms of how are we going to make sure that our babies learn to read and write? How are we going to teach these kindergartners online? What does that look like? How are we going to deliver special education and related services through a computer? We've learned so much. We've had a person doing some training with us back in January, and she talked a lot about unfinished learning. Some people use the terminology learning loss. You won't hear those words necessarily coming out of my mouth because I don't think what we've experienced is really a loss of learning, but I do think there's been some unfinished learning for our students. It's a different way of thinking about it, and I like the way she's kind of flipped that for us. And so when we talk about unfinished learning and we talk about all the gifts and the strengths and the skills that our students have accomplished over these last couple years, they've learned how to communicate differently with us. They've learned how to be responsive, and then there have been those who have not. We've seen the whole continuum, and so I shared just a couple of tidbits just in terms of what I think is really important as educators. I've been at this game for a few years now, and I started at a very young age to be at this for over 20 plus years. I won't say how many plus years, but you might think maybe, oh yeah, she looks like she's only like 30, right? But nonetheless, I think we've learned so many lessons, and I think each of us try to apply those lessons each and every day that we're working with our families, that we're working with our students. And at the end of the day, we want to get it right. We absolutely want to get it right, and we need you partnering with us. And we want to show grace to you, and we want you to show grace to our teachers. As Miss Olivia was saying too, is there are times where we're frustrated and we're emotional, and it's hard. And if we have an angry conversation with a parent who's equally passionate about what's happening for their son or their daughter, we want to have the answers, and we want to do well. And so we're going to continue to focus on our communication. We're going to continue to focus on being proactive and responsive. We often talk about assume good intentions. Assume if you assume good intentions of us and we assume good intentions from your perspective, I think we're going to come up with good answers and good approaches for what matters for children. And I'm going to just kind of conclude with a quote by George Bernard Shaw that I think is really powerful. You've probably heard it before. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We just need to slow down and listen to one another. And before we begin to prepare our response, which isn't really a response, it's the point we wanted to make, before we do that, we should really practice the skill of parroting back what we think we've heard in an effort to understand. If we seek to understand, I think we're going to be much better in communicating with one another. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, everybody. That was just what a great panel. of experts here. And you can tell how much thought you put into this because you do it every single day with the children you're with, your own children, the people that you're working with in your schools. And we appreciate you bringing that to us. And I hope this is a start of something we can continue to do to keep outreach. And I love what you said, Marquea, about building relationships. That's not something you do in the first meeting when you're sitting down with a parent. And when I was a school psychologist and I would have parents come in, it took a while. I would have to have 2 to 3 meetings to sit down and try to get to know what was going on and what was happening with those parents. And it takes time for them to trust us. And we have to be vulnerable, like you were talking about, Brenda, being honest when we make mistakes, telling them that we're not the experts. Parents are the experts of their children, and they are the ones that need to come up with some of the solutions as well, and what you were talking about. But very wonderful. Thank you all. So at this time, what I'd like the audience to do is to share some things that you found helpful, or ask your questions. And we're not going to use a microphone because we don't have people that we need to worry about. I think everybody can hear us. But we would like to get some feedback from the audience and certainly address our great panel members here, again, for their time and commitment that they've been here. All right. Questions? Comments? Okay. Sophia.
I've definitely learned a lot throughout this meeting. Each of you have such interesting points and perspectives to bring to the table, so I wanted to thank you guys for sharing all of that. I think what really struck me the most and what I found the most helpful about this was the emphasis in a panel about communication, the emphasis on listening to others, the act of taking in what other people are saying and just trying to slow down. I think that that's something that should not be looked over. It should definitely be emphasized. So, yeah, there's that.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate that. Other questions for our panelists? Or comments that you want to make regarding things that they said? There were such eloquent speakers. All right.
Okay, I have a slightly different perspective. I am a parent and a former teacher, although far more at the college level than K-12. I've done some of each. But I'm officially retired and have been spending most of my time with an organization called Braver Angels, of which I'm the state coordinator. We are working to depolarize, in a sense, I sometimes say, try to keep the country from falling apart, as bad things are. So anyway, that's the areas I was listening with, and I think almost everything you said is absolutely applicable to the problems we have talking about, liberals and conservatives talking to each other, almost everything. The importance of personal relationships is so overlooked. Assuming good intentions, so often people think, oh, those people are either stupid, ignorant, or downright evil. They couldn't possibly think that what they're saying. No, I mean, professional politicians are another story, but you're the 99% of the public. It's not the way. The main difference, I'd say, is simply that the assumption of ill will is much stronger in the political divide. So, I mean, I don't mean to say that what you're facing is easy by a long shot, but at least you have that advantage. People, I think parents are more likely to assume that teachers or the school doesn't care than if they actually want to hurt the kids.
And Don brought some handouts that we have out on the table out there regarding discussions, political discussions. I told him that that wouldn't be the format for tonight, but certainly there's some excellent ideas out there. And I was looking over your handout, and they did cover a lot of the very issues you talked about on that handout. So I encourage you to get that handout. So your group is available to also help out.
Absolutely. In fact, I was going to say, we would be happy to put on a workshop. We have workshops for, one is called Skills for Bridging the Divide. Another is Depolarizing Within, because so much of our problems come from talking about those crazy people on the other side. And we'd be happy to put on a workshop for any group, really. Just give me a call. Teachers, parents, whatever.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
I was wondering if anybody has
strategies. Who would like to talk about those strategies? Has anybody encountered that kind of anger where, ha ha, everybody? So somebody want to share a little bit about how that was handled, that you felt worked? Or?
I can say something really quick, and what I try to avoid that very thing. So I try to be as proactive as possible, but I'm sure that you have great insight when you're in the thick of it. Who wants to take in the thick of it?
In my few months in this job, I've had a few experiences. I'm sure others have as well. I think in the thick of the moment, being willing to be that person to kind of step back and just kind of be the voice of reason, and not in a way that makes anyone feel like you're speaking down to them, but in a way that says, okay, you know what, we're all kind of harried right now. Let's all take a breath. Let's just kind of be calm. I've been in situations where folks are yelling at you, folks are screaming at you, and it is difficult. It's a highly charged situation, but I think recognizing that it's not personal and really trying to figure out what's going on behind the scenes with whomever you're engaged with, and just agreeing that we may disagree, giving each person a second to kind of just gather themselves, and then let's kind of come back and focus on the issue. And I think when we can kind of redirect the conversation away from the person, because sometimes there are personal attacks. Well, you're this and you're that, and there's a lot of the you statements. But really getting folks to begin to think more deeply around what is it that you want out of the circumstance. And even today, I was asking some of the individuals I was talking to, what is it that you want? What do you want us to do? Because it was really hard at times to really be crystal clear. And so asking that question and being willing to at least put that on the table so that we can try to find some common ground, and listening for where might I find something in common, even if it's a stretch, trying to find something in common so that the person that you're interacting with at least feels like they've been heard. We may still agree to disagree, but you know what? We both agree that Sally really is a great kid, and that Sally really has some great strengths, and we want to figure out how to build upon those strengths. I mean, whatever it is, and sometimes you have to really grapple to figure that out. But I think in the heat of those moments, really trying to be the person that's willing to step back. Kind of what Brenda was talking also is that even if it means you have to acknowledge that, wait a minute, I don't know all the answers to this, or maybe I was wrong in my assessment of the situation. Whether you were wrong or not wrong, sometimes that's a nice diffuser as well, to be able to kind of give individuals an opportunity to kind of save face, and then let's kind of come at this again, and let's kind of come at it a different approach to see if we can figure out what the next step needs to be. That's one way that I've used it in the past, to try to calm folks down. And in the end, there have been times where it's worked very well, and there have still been circumstances where it just didn't work. For a variety of reasons. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Can I chime in a little bit? One thing I've learned is don't ask why somebody's doing something. It's for some reason people have this aversion. If they're doing something, you think about like a toddler who broke something. It's like, why did you do that? It always comes out accusatory for some reason. That's just how it lands. So if you can say, I hear what you're saying, but I'm wondering what's prompting you to feel that way, or something like that. But I think that word, like, why do you feel like that? That always comes out kind of hard. So I try to avoid that. And then also, and this is funny because it's just like dealing with kids. People don't change too much from when they're really little when they get really upset. So if you say calm down, that doesn't work. So if you, like you said, take it upon yourself and say, I need a minute to calm myself down, or I need a minute, and then that kind of shifts. But it's just little tiny things that the way that a phrase can land can make all the difference too.
I have a couple questions that are see that the answer might be a mid-level kind of answer. It may not be specifically in the classroom. Like if you're sort of interested in a policy change, like say, like I think like all my kids are older now, but I remember moments where I wished we had more recess. It didn't feel quite appropriate to go to the teacher about that because it felt more like a sort of school policy thing. But I didn't know how to connect with other parents, or like, should I go to my principal, who I suspected wouldn't be particularly sympathetic, or you know. So I guess there's that question when you really don't think it's like the teacher doing anything at all, the teacher making a decision. When you feel like that decision is made at a sort of different level of the school system, then how would you approach that? And then slightly connected with that is the sense that I have that some of the emotion and the anger now has to do with our sense often of powerlessness in this situation where so much is out of our control. And when I think of the emotion and the temperatures rising around things like masks or even the bus system and the ability of the bus system to work or not work, and we're all, you know, aware that not everyone is aware, a lot of us are aware that everybody is working so hard to do it, and yet things still may not all be coming into place to work for everybody. So I'm not sure I'm formulating this as a question, but it has to do about powerlessness, if you think that that sense has to do with people's emotion, and if so, if there's a way of giving or extending power that may actually have a result of lowering the temperature. It's just
There's several things to address there. So let me just go back to the original part of your question, like when you have a concern about something that you feel like the teachers, they don't necessarily make that decision, who would you go to? And I would encourage you, yes, you keep your email short and to the point and friendly, and send it to the principal. You should get a response. My standard in my school is for my teachers, when they are sending an email, you've got 24 hours to respond, and I need to do the same thing. And if I can't get back to that parent right away, I can at least tell that parent, I want to address this. I don't have time right now. Could we set up a time that we could talk by phone? Because sometimes that's a much easier method when there's give and take right there on the spot. But then I would encourage you, not to be discouraged if you feel like your voice isn't heard at that moment. Sometimes some of those changes, there's so much involved, with scheduling, with expectations from the state, from your corporation, of, this is how much time you have to spend here and there. And if it is something you feel passionate about, I would encourage you to keep bringing it up professionally, friendly, but this is a concern. We've gone through, education goes through so many pendulums. You see it swinging all the time. And there are good reasons that happens, but there was a time when we were taking recess away. The kids hardly had any time. And we realized right away, no, that's a mistake. And we have to acknowledge when we're wrong and fix it. So I would encourage you, when you do have something like that you're passionate about, don't let it go just because maybe the first time you feel like something wasn't done. It doesn't mean you weren't heard. And sometimes the right circumstances haven't come together yet to make it happen. But we remember those conversations, especially when they're done in a polite, professional way. It really helps. So that's part of your question. I forgot what some of the rest of it was now.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you. Your commitment, your spirit of collaboration comes across loud and clear. So thank you for what you have chosen to do takes time, right? Because it's easy to say, you said this to me, I'm gonna take you at your word, I'm gonna assume we're done, and we're gonna move forward. And I had a boss years ago who was masterful at picking up on what I wasn't saying. And she said, she'd say, I'm not sure you're with me. And then the more she encouraged that, and I'd say, well, I sort of have this question, and then we'd have great dialogue. But had she not taken that time and just taken it at the surface and just moved forward, then we would have missed a lot. So I appreciate all the good tips. But again, the collaboration between parents and teachers, and that has to work on both sides, right? There has to be a nice balance for that. And I love the idea of your letter, Michelle, and I'm curious, is that something that you came up with, or was that modeled for you?
I saw some sort of article somewhere online. I was like, I'm doing this. This is great. And so, and of course I have to say, I've got 2 kids, and then first kid really did it quite well. By the time the second kid rolled around, I knew all the people, so it wasn't, I may have slacked off there, but I think it's, it's just something that you see teachers doing, and it's like, wait, why aren't we telling them about us too? We send in the forms, but those are so, they need that information, but that's just, you see a giant sheet of data, ugh. So, and I forgot to mention too, maybe I forgot to mention, throw a picture on there of your kid doing something that's unusual or whatever. Just, it gives a little bit, everybody relates better, I think, when there's some visual, so.
It's a beautiful idea, and it just, really does open the doors for potentially lots of great communication, building the relationships. It really is a two-way street. It doesn't have to come all from one side or the other, so it's a lovely idea. I've never heard of that, so that's great.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time, your energy, your passion.
I did have a teacher that asked us for questions very similar to what your letter was about, that would give me the opportunity to write about my kids, so they would kind of have an insight to who they are before school started, or just in the first few months. And I'm sure that was helpful for them, because some of my children you needed to know a little bit more about than others. So that was a nice opportunity to be proactive. And so I love the idea of doing it yourself if a teacher doesn't give you that opportunity. But I have had teachers who've done that, so it is one way that two-way communication can open.
Gotta get that information out there. Any other comments? Yeah, Alice.
Oh, I absolutely enjoyed this, taking a lot of notes too. But I guess I have a question that wasn't addressed here, and that is, we always are concerned about students who slip through the cracks, but how do you get parents who have slipped through the cracks? I've heard the things that you do, all the programs and the muffins for moms and donuts for dads and things, but what do you do?
I can talk a little bit to that. Yeah, because we are across the board. The saddest thing is right before the pandemic, our family participation was incredible at Fairview, and it was really electric and exciting, and then it just hit. And so there are things, for me, I just feel like I can't give up, and that's why I make sure that I have multiple forms of communication. So for every email, there's a text, there's a post, we put it in our school newsletter. And the thing is, I know the families that read the newsletter, I know the families that text, I know the families that email. And then if I'm not hearing back for things that are particularly important, like we've had amazing opportunities with the Evening of the Stars with our show choir, and we really, I remember Miss Cole Glazier and I would make sure we called each one of those families to follow up. So I think that's very deliberate, and again, it takes time, but that's something that we've done to try to make that work.
So I was wondering, if the texting, are those things that the teachers have just figured out and just text directly, or is there an overarching
There are
app
thing?
Yes, there is. I know Remind is the one that I use, but I know that there's also Dojo. I know a lot of teachers communicate via Dojo. So it is like on a platform where it's not a personal phone number, just for obvious reasons.
And I know there are times when the teachers will say, I just can't get a response from this family. So then we, as an administrative team, we start working together and trying to figure out who would be the best person to approach this. Because sometimes they will respond when an administrator calls, and you can reach out and then touch that family. Maybe it's someone that your social worker needs to go and make a home visit. But even when we're doing things as academic as data meetings, we are looking at every single student. And for some schools, that's a lot of students. In my school, that's around 650 students. And so I'll sit down. It's right about this time of the year, we're having those data meetings once a week. And I'm sitting down with every teacher, and we are talking about every kid. And if we come to that kid where we're just not getting a response, we'll set up a little plan. All right, you're going to try this. Let me know if that doesn't work. Then we're going to go to number 2, and if that doesn't work, we're going to go to number 3. Because if the parent slips through the crack and you're needing to reach that student, then you won't have any success. You've got to reach out somehow. That was hard during the pandemic too, but that was a time when I got to see parts of Monroe County I never knew existed before, but it was very interesting, very eye-opening.
We did a lot of that in MCCSC as well. You know, we had some students who were online, but they weren't engaged and they weren't participating. And so we kind of did a full court press, and we also went out to homes to connect with the students and to connect with the families, because the parents were oftentimes disengaged and the students were as well. And so we were sending postcards, we were emailing, we were telephone calling, we were knocking on the doors. I can't tell you how many times I would knock on a door and I was told, don't you ever show up at my house again, unannounced. Oh, yes, indeed. And that was the pleasant way that it was stated to me. But, you know, and then 20 minutes later, we're talking about getting the student back into school and what it's going to take. And we actually were successful in getting that child back in school and participating, even though it would have been very easy to walk away after you kind of got yelled at for knocking on the door at 10 o'clock in the morning. But we persisted. And in that particular instance, it helped. But we do recognize that some of our families are disengaged because they're surviving. They're trying to figure out how to survive in the midst of all of this. And it's not for us to pass judgment on that, but trying to figure out, well, what do you need? You know, what are the resources? And we pull in social workers, we pull in counselors, we pull in different administrators, and it really has been an all hands on deck push. And so I think that's been very helpful at times, but it hasn't always worked for everyone. And so trying to figure out, well, what's going to work with this family? Kind of like what Brenda was saying, is like, well, who has a relationship here? Who has a connection? And leaning on some of those connections. I know in other districts, we would make home visits to every student in the school before the opening of the new school year. That's a big effort, but we made a commitment to doing that, and that helped us down the road when there became a problem or there was an issue. That family member knew that we were knocking on their doors, the principals, the teachers, everybody had an assignment. You've got 20 kids' houses to visit. Go meet those families, talk to them, introduce yourself. And that paid off great big dividends for us later on in the school year when there was an issue or a problem, because Mrs. Johnson knew that the school had been to her home and talked with her and was willing to kind of work that out. And, you know, we need to think about some of those strategies again as we come through this past couple of years and figure out, well, what does that look like in 2022? You know, in the midst of a pandemic, it may have to look a little bit different, but the outcome, hopefully, and the genuine approach still is necessary.
Thank you for that.
I think for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and stop, but I want to say just all of the things that you talked about are the very reasons the power of public education is saving our world. And I just hope everybody gets a good feel. A lot of people don't know those kind of things that you do, and after hours, how late you stay up thinking about how these forms that you make to say which parent have I talked to, which one have I not talked to, all the things even as a parent and working to create those relationships between the schools. So very impressive, and I just want to give an applause for this group. I think we need to take the show on the road, is what I think. But anyway, I also wanted to say to you, we have brought a plant for each one of you. For all the love you've given to every child out there, that is you, and that's those children. You have touched their soil and their hearts, and we really appreciate everything that you do every single day. It's a lot, we know.
Thank you.
Carrie, you want to go ahead and finish off the...
I'm gonna keep it brief. Oh my gosh, this panel, you guys are amazing. Thank you all for coming tonight. Don't forget to join us. We're starting to renew our membership again for this coming year. We're at keepeducationpublic.org. Our next event will be on May 9th, right here, 7 p.m., and it's about taxes and how your taxes work with public education and all the other types of education Indiana has. Please join us. So anyway, have a wonderful evening. Thank you again all for coming.
Thank you.